Welcome to EDFD 180, Social, Cultural, and Political Foundations of Education. This is the Gender and Sexuality in Schools lecture. As part of today, we will review what gender in schooling looks like, what sexuality in schooling looks like, and what gender and sexuality inclusion means. We'll start first by looking at gender. Gender refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or boy, as well as relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. Gender is hierarchical and produces inequalities that intersect with other social and economic inequalities. Gender-based discrimination intersects with other factors of discrimination, such as ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, age, geographic location, gender identity, and sexual orientation, among others. This is referred to as intersectionality. Gender interacts with, but is different from sex, which refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of females, males, and intersex persons, such as chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender and sex are related to, but different from, gender identity. Gender identity refers to a person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond to the person's physiology or designated sex at birth. Over the past few centuries, single gender education was largely the norm, and indeed, in America, prior to the 19th century, single gender schooling was widely seen even up to the collegiate levels. Originally, in colonial America, males were the only ones that had widespread access to schooling, even though in many parts of the country, organized schooling was not available for most children. According to research, it seems that a mixture of both single gender and mixed gender schooling was interspersed throughout America, largely depending on the religious, social, and financial situations of the particular region. For instance, in New England, mixed gender schools and schools for women were much more prevalent than in regions south of the Chesapeake Bay. While the primary and secondary schools were more likely to be mixed gender, colleges primarily stayed single gender. In 1972, spearheaded by Representative Patsy Mink, the United States passed the Educational Amendments of 1972, including Title IX, which stated that a federally funded school could not discriminate based on sex. This caused single-gender public schools to close or begin integration of both sexes. Private and religious schools became the dominant representatives of single-gender education in the United States. There are multiple issues that arise from gender separation. In the previous slide, you saw that there's ideas and interests that are determined about what subject areas girls can and can't engage in. And then we see these biases reproduced in schools through the exclusion and inclusion of certain students, right? So for a really long time in this example, girls were not participating in school. Right, so we're going to be behind on technical things like mathematics, for example. But if a male student is falling behind, right, then the assumption is made that that male student, that individual, is not good at math. But when female students, or those who present as female, are not good at math, then it's made to be a representation of the entire gender. Right, this is the way in which biases around gender in schooling can manifest and be promoted. We also see this through the application of dress codes, right, that are applied for girls, but not necessarily applied to boys. This is a really great quote around biases in dress codes, right? So bias in dress codes is not just about gender. Students of color are often found to be in violation of school and district dress codes because of their hair. So this quote really shows the intersectional nature of gender discrimination and gender biases that students can encounter in schools. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is the presence of transgender and gender nonconforming youth in schools and the extreme hostility that these students tend to experience. Around 84% of transgender and nearly 70% of gender nonconforming students have been bullied or harassed at school because of their gender or their gender presentation. 4 in 10 transgender and gender nonconforming students also face gender-related discrimination at school, including having their dead names used, right, or prevented from using their preferred names or their preferred pronouns, and or being denied access to the bathroom that aligns with their gender representation. All issues that are discussed and thought about under Title IX. Gender inequality in schools also has major impact on futures, particularly future earnings and family development. So men are often stereotyped in more white collar positions and positions with leadership, while women are directed and coached towards more caretaker positions, right? Things like teachers, nursing, or even stay-at-home parents. This often results in economic inequality between men and women, with men earning on average 25% more than every woman. Um, and there are ways that this can be changed through schooling, right? The first is ensuring that both male and female students and trans and gender nonconforming students all have access to the same programs and opportunities, both for learning, but also for interacting, right? And just social interactions. Secondly, we need to make sure that we are expecting the same behaviors from across a range of genders, right? So kindness is kindness, no matter what, right? Being true and transparent with your emotions, that's true no matter what, right? Like crying isn't just for girls, and being tough, shouldn't be something that boys are forced into doing, because we know that there are definitely um, outcomes, right? There are material outcomes and material impacts of these behaviors and of treating people in these ways, or indoctrinating children to believe that they should behave in certain ways based on their gender. And finally, the government has a role, right, in making teaching and learning methods free of gender biases and stereotypes, right? Making sure that we're looking at the representation of male, female, trans, and gender nonconforming students across mathematics classes, across art classes, across philosophy classes, right? Making sure that there's equal representation and equal access. So now we'll shift over to sexuality. So first we'll define what sexuality is. Sexuality does not begin at puberty. Awareness of gender and sexuality develops from birth and unfolds through childhood and adolescence. Healthy sexual development is influenced by the interaction of biology, family, religion, culture, history, economic forces, and ethical and spiritual factors. Sexuality is not just about sex. Sexuality also encompasses gender identities and roles, sexual orientation, the developmental changes of adolescence, relationships, intimacy and pleasure, and finally, reproduction. Families and schools share the responsibilities for fostering healthy sexual development among youth. They have complementary roles. Families impart core values and beliefs, and schools contribute knowledge and social skills. Both seek to foster the development of core values, such as responsibility to others and rights to safety, health, and happiness. Schools work best when families understand and support the educational process. Gender and sexuality education should provide students with the information, social skills, and values needed to meet those goals. Gender and sexuality education should be medically accurate and developmentally appropriate. For decades, research on gender and sexuality education finds that providing young people with knowledge and understanding of human sexuality is not harmful and is frequently protective of life and health. So what are some ways in which we can include gender and sexuality conversations in our classrooms um, without necessarily taking on too much of a topic, right? So the first is we need to have representation, right? So when we're talking about the civil rights movement, we need to center the fact that there were gay activists, right? We should do this when we're talking about any movement. This is important because representation matters, right? Seeing yourself in the world matters. It matters to youth and it also matters to adults. Secondly, we should decenter gender, right? We should stop talking about colors and gender, about colors and toys and play as if those things are gender, right? Pink is not just for girls, blue is not just for boys, you know, Legos are for everyone. Trucks are for everyone, fire trucks are for everyone, right? So making sure that we're allowing students to really explore the range of their imagination without it being centered on gender. Next, pay attention to pronouns, right? So ask students what are their preferred pronouns and actually stand by them. Share with students your preferred pronouns as a way of modeling this behavior. Another way that we can decenter gender and also kind of decenter pronouns, these binary pronouns, is by using gender neutral descriptions of certain professions, right? So instead of saying mankind, let's say humankind. Instead of saying a fireman or a policeman, right? It's a firefighter or a police officer. You know, it's not a businessman, right? It's a business person. It's just very simple changes to our language will also help with decentering, with making students feel included across gender and sexual identity. And then finally, just make sure that the work is age appropriate. There are texts for pre-K, right, and early ages through to university that explore these topics and themes. So just be selective about how you introduce these things and don't always make it the center of attention, right? Again, right, representation is just, if we're going to be talking about families, why not also read Entangle Makes Three in addition to a book that shows a traditional family, right? This is a book that is based on two male penguins, right, raising an egg, right, or having a baby penguin. How does that happen, right? Like that is reflective of the ways that certain families happen for our students as well, right, where there may be two male or two female parents or different configurations, right, where they could have single parent households. So just being mindful about ensuring that students are seeing in their classrooms various representations of gender and sexuality yeah, in the world. Okay, and that wraps us up for today. Thank you.